Okay. 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 Leif, do you want to go ahead and do the intros?
I will do, Steve. So, good evening. I am Leif Stenberg, the Dean of the Aga Khan University Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilisations. And I thank you for attending today's lecture titled Generational Change and Pluralism, Accommodating Difference Within Communities. This lecture is the 8th and concluding lecture in a series of public events on pluralism and plurality in Islamic cultures, hosted by the Aga Khan University Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilisations, AKU-ISMC, in collaboration with the Aga Khan Museum and the Aga Khan Trust for Culture's education program. I warmly thank the Museum and the Trust for Culture for being partners in organizing this lecture series. Pluralism is the theme of the lecture series, and it's a term which typically describes the coming together of people and groups from different backgrounds, religions, and worldviews. Within every community, however homogeneous it may appear to outside observers, there are processes of change over time that can pose challenges for communication and understanding, making a discussion on our conceptualization of pluralism really important. This talk will focus on the generational change in a village in northern Punjab, Pakistan, to make sense of different responses to environmental change and economic change. Ultimately, this talk argues that our judgment of the appropriateness of each of the generational strategies is shaped by our own experience and priorities, and they in turn are influenced by the worldviews in which we exist. As the head of educational programs and development at AKU-ISMC, today's speaker, Professor Stephen Lyon, has embodied our vision to engage with important topics concerning contemporary affairs and histories of Muslim cultures and societies. Professor Lyon is a world-leading anthropologist with an extensive understanding of Pakistan, having lived there off and on since the 1980s. In collaboration with colleagues, Steve recently received a considerable grant from the British Academy concerning the study of water management in northern Pakistan. In addition, in March this year, Steve was also appointed an editor-in-chief of the prestigious sage journal, the Social Science Computer Review. I would like to take this opportunity to recommend Steve's recently launched online lecture series titled Conversations on Pakistan's Response to the Crisis, which focused on COVID-19. These lectures, along with many more, are available on AKU-ISMC's YouTube channel. In addition, I also recommend a new issue of our occasional paper series devoted to COVID-19 responses in Iran, Pakistan, and Syria. To access the report, go to the AKU-ISMC Facebook page and you'll find a link to download the paper. Finally, I look forward to meeting many of you in person in future, when some normality resumes. And I conclude by welcoming Professor Steve Lyon. So over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Leif. And thank you all for coming. I know this is probably not the best time for everyone now that we are in lockdown. Maybe the evenings are not so convenient for our public talks, but this is the time that we've kind of set aside for them. So we're going to carry on this year with this time, and then maybe in the future, if you want to provide some feedback, let us know that we need to change this. What I want to do is talk a little bit about pluralism, but within a community that might from the outside look more homogenous, that might look like there's not so much pluralism. And what I want to argue is that there is variation and difference within as well as between all communities and all groups. Now I'm going to do this. I'm going to talk a little bit about this generational change that I'm talking about, generational variation, and how within a community there may be generations that have very different strategies, very different priorities. But I'm going to go a little bit beyond that and say they actually might have very different worldviews. In a much more profound sense, they understand the world differently. And it is imperative that even within that kind of contrasting worldviews, that some kind of tolerance and patience and cooperation is required for those communities to function effectively. And I'm going to do this first by the kind of conventional lecture. I'm going to talk at you. I'm going to have some slides and I'm going to show it. And then I want to let my informants do a little bit of talking. So I've got a video that a film crew came out to the little village I've been working at for the last 22 years, and they made a film. And so I think the film is actually very exciting. I enjoy it. It's not finished, right? We started in 2014. It's 12 minutes long, and we're just not there yet. We're still working on it, but there's a version of it on YouTube. I'll give you the URL. So if you want to go watch the full 12 minutes in its glory, not finished yet, but it's there, then you will be able to. So let me start with the slides. Generational change and pluralism. So pluralism and diversity is at the heart of this lecture series. The Aga Khan Trust for Culture, Aga Khan University, Aga Khan Museum, we came together this year to host a series of talks that picked up this challenge from His Highness the Aga Khan, Chancellor of the Aga Khan University, to figure out how to harness the pluralism and diversity in society, in education, in religion, in every aspect of life. And so you see that across the Aga Khan Development Network, there are a series of agendas that try and harness some of this strength and the challenges of pluralism diversity. Of course, this can be easier to say sometimes than to do. I remember years ago, I was required by my former university to do something, to do a kind of training about cultural sensitivity. So we all went along, and in this class, we were shown photographs of people. We were given life stories, and we were asked to raise our hands whether we thought this person was troublesome or not troublesome. And every single person that they put up, you know, they had some body piercings or they had some tattoos, but the backstory was this person has an MBA from Harvard, this person has a PhD from Oxford. In every other respect, apart from some relatively trivial thing, there was no problem with them, right? So it's a little bit like that film, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, when Sidney Poitier turns up as the prospective boyfriend, as the prospective groom of the young woman. If he weren't a black man, every father-in-law would have loved this man. He was a doctor, he was successful, he was fabulous. That is an easy kind of pluralism to deal with. But we're actually talking about a pluralism that can be difficult. A pluralism where I have a very good friend who firmly believes, he lives in the UK, and he firmly believes that girls and boys should not be educated together. He firmly believes that women are a different kind of human being than men, and that they have different roles and they should not be allowed to do the same thing. That's a challenging form of diversity and pluralism. I find it difficult to have some conversations with him. I think it's still important to have those conversations. He tries to persuade me that I'm wrong, and I try and persuade him that he's wrong. We have to maintain some kind of almost I wouldn't call it an antagonistic tolerance, but there's definitely a tension there. There's a tension of tolerance. And that's not always easy, but it is something that I think ultimately makes our societies stronger. Now, that is a relatively easy diversity to see between different religious communities, between different ethnic communities. But I'm going to argue that even within a group, there can be considerable variation that also requires the same levels of tolerance and patience for effectively harnessing the strengths that you would have that you would have the same challenges as harnessing the strengths between communities. So, for example, gender groups can experience the world very differently. Hopefully this is complementary, but it also requires attention. We have to make sure that it doesn't become neglect or exploitation. One of the things that has come very, very much to the fore as a consequence of the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement is a realization on the part of many men that women don't experience the world in the same way that many men do. Me walking down the streets of London at night, 9, 10 o'clock, I don't particularly feel threatened or challenged. I feel like, okay, these are the streets, there may be something bad happens, but it's unlikely. Probably I'm going to be safe. And what I've discovered from speaking to many of my women friends is that they don't necessarily share that comfort in the world around them, that they see many more threats because their world experience has taught them that there are many more threats. Now, generations, older people, younger people, may also have sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle, different worldviews that go unexamined and indeed unnoticed. And I say worldview here, I'm not talking about, you know, old people complaining that young people's jeans are too tight or their hair is too short or too long or whatever it is. Those are the kind of stylistic differences, but actually some fairly profound assumptions about what is right and what is wrong in the world. So let me give you an example that doesn't come from the Muslim world. It comes from the Mosquito coasts of Nicaragua. So I did some work with a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, Mark Jameson, some years back. He had collected these fabulous kinship term maps from along the coast of Mosquito, Nicaragua, different villages, different dialects of Mosquito, and he discovered some change, this transformation of the kinship terms. Now, these Mosquito speakers on the coast of Nicaragua have a very long history of exposure to English-speaking traders and English-speaking missionaries. And so what he's found is that contemporary young Mosquito speakers have actually adopted a subtle shift in their worldview as a consequence to the exposure to the English-speaking missionaries and traders. Now, I think we can identify that linguistically, but it goes well beyond just a simple linguistics. If I can get back to, I imagine, sorry, I've just done something stupid with the screen. Okay. Now, let's see. Sorry, I'm getting a message here. Do I need to fix anything? Or is this, are we good to go? No, I'm not getting a message. Now is okay. Okay, so now is okay. Thank you. So if you look at this kin term map, this is a table of kin terms, and I apologize if you're dealing with anthropologists, you're almost inevitably going to wind up talking about kin terms at some point. There we go. Sorry about this. Let me give you an insider of the back end of this. There's a big dialog box that's blocking my screen. So every time I move it, my screen disappears. So I'm going to have to do this a little bit from memory. So on the left-hand side, you have the parallel relations. That means your father's father or your mother's sister. So those are your relatives of the same sex of your parents. That's parallel. Cross means that there's a cross sibling. So your father's sister or your mother's brother. And then you have +2 is the generation 2 above, +1, the generation 1 above, 0 is my generation, ego. That's a classic anthropological term, meaning whoever the focus of reference is. And then you have a -1, that's your own children, and a -2, that is your grandchildren, if you're the ego. So if you look at this, one of the striking things about Mosquito kinship terminology is when they refer to siblings, and they don't use the sex of the person they're talking to define the term they use. Instead, the term, whether your sibling is the same sex as you or a different sex as you, that's how you determine which term to use. So my brother, I would call Lakra. My sister would call our sister Lakra. I would call my sister, no, sorry, I'm getting this backwards. My brother, I would call Muini, and I would call my sister Lakra. My sister would call her sister Muini, and she would call me Lakra, right? So we're actually using quite confusing terms for English speakers. And you can see how confusing it is that even when I have it written in front of me, I still struggle to say it right. This is a really different way of thinking about people. Now, one of the key terms in here, in this kinship terminology, and I'm not included in this table, it's a cross cousin opposite sex. So this is Waikot. This also used to be the term for brother-in-law. So your cross cousin was also your brother-in-law. Those were the same terms, and that reflected a very strong preference for cross cousin marriage. Now, what's interesting about this is that young people have abandoned this. Young people still use the terms Lakra and Muini, but they don't use them the Mosquito way. They use them interchangeably with English terms that have come into the language called breda and sista. And no prizes for guessing what breda and sista mean. They mean brother and sister. So young people are using terms in one way. Older people, their grandparents, their parents are using terms in a different way. So when the young people speak to the older people, they're using terms that mean something slightly differently. And the old people of course find that very frustrating. And young people find it slightly odd and puzzling that old people keep getting their sibling terms wrong. Now, that's it could sound trivial, but I think it actually reflects something much wider about how young people see themselves in the world. The young people no longer see themselves embedded in a network of cross-cousin marriages, but much more in the way North Americans would see themselves as individual architects of their own future. Now, that's a fairly profound change. If Mark were on this call or on this talk, he might jump in and say, I've kind of misunderstood it. But Mark and I have spent the last 15 years arguing about this, and I think I'm right, even if he thinks he's right. So I'm going to go on now. That's a good example of how within a community, different generations start to adopt some fairly different linguistic patterns, which actually reveal something different about how they see the world and how they see themselves in the world. So now I'm going to show you some video clips. I'm going to show you 4 video clips. I'm going to show you one at a time, and afterwards I will just briefly talk about it. But before I show you the video, I want to just give credit to the film team. In 2014, I was staying in Pakistan. It was one of those lucky times when I had a research leave, an extended research leave, and I was able to spend several months in Pakistan again. And a very good friend of mine, his son was in film school. His son was learning how to be a filmmaker. And so I invited his son and his son's classmates to come out and make a film in the village that I work in. So Hamza Yazdani Malik is the director, and he brought out his mates Yasser Ehsan and Raza Zain, and they did a fantastic job. I asked 2 of the landlords to be the focus of this film. So this is Malik Asif Nawaz and Malika Veseli, and you will get to meet them in just a moment. Now, interestingly, I have taken a lot of video footage in this village over the decades. My video footage is always very serendipitous, right? I get out my camera and whatever happens, that's what gets on the camera. If I see something exciting, I'll pull out the camera and I might catch it halfway through. So I gave a list of things to Hamza and his mates. I said, listen, guys, this is what I would like you to capture in the film. And they listened to that very patiently, and then they just ignored it. And they said, no, we're not doing that. So everything that I said I wanted them to capture, they just told people to act out. So they would get people together and they'd say, listen, you, Dr. Saab says this is what you do in natural context, so do it. And I was kind of horrified at first, but now when I watch the video, if I didn't know that it was all staged, I'm really not sure that I would be able to pick it out. So they did a brilliant job. I'm hugely impressed, and I admit that the arrogance of the academic was misplaced. Filmmakers really do a good job of this. So let me now unmute. So the subtitles on this are one of the things that are continuously evolving and progressing. I've had numerous people kind of comment on the subtitles, and they're still not right, but you know, we fumble through and we'll do our best. If you have a better translation for any of these subtitles, then please give it to me. I asked some students at Aga Khan University to comment on the subtitles very recently, and they were pleased and appalled at the particular dialect of Punjabi that is spoken here. So let me show the film now. And this is about a minute long.
मेरा नाम मलिक आसिफ नवाज है जी। मैं रोड का रहने वाला हूँ। मेरी कौम गुजर है, तहसील फतेह जंग ते जिला अटक है। FSC मैं असफर माल कॉलेज तो की थी। उस तो बाद मैंने उसी कॉलेज में दोबारा दाखिला लेता है 3rd ईयर में, लेकिन इतनी इसी टाइम में मेरे वालिद साहब बीमार है, तो मैं अपने घर दा सब तो बड़ा उन्होंने बेटा है, उन्होंने कफालत वास्ते उन्होंने बीमारी ने वास्ते मैं अपनी तालीम छोड़ के इत्थे पिंड वापस आना पे। ते उस तो बाद उन्होंने नाल कफालत उन्होंने खिदमत विच पिछे रहा। ते उस तो बाद वो बीमार ज्यादा होए ते सन 1982 विच उन्होंने वफात हो गई है। उसी तरह मैं अपने वालिदैन ने फौत होने के बाद अपनी सारी तरबियत अपने मामू नाल हासिल की है। बाकी इलाके दी गमी खुशी आना जाना कोई सिस्टम जिहड़ा है बहुत कुछ उन्हां कोल सिक्खिया है और अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह अल्लाह दी मेहरबानी नाल उन्हां दी बख्शिश करे मैं उन्हां कोल सीख के ते बहुत बड़ा अपनी जिंदगी विच भी इनकलाब आंदा है अपनी जमीना बारानी एरिया जिहड़े मेरे वालदैन तो मां मिलियां या बारानी एरिया जिस नाल दारोमदार बारिश च होना है और अपनी जमीना मैं चाही करके मैं भी अपना ट्यूबवेल ला दिता है असां बड़ी कोशिश तो बाद मैं अपनी एफर्ट्स तो बाद अपने ट्यूबवेल ते बिजली लाई है बिजली लाने ना ही फायदा हो गया है कि अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह जिसले गवर्नमेंट ना मसले मसाइल तो लोड शेडिंग तो होनी शुरू हुई है लेकिन बिजली ने फायदा ही है कि जमींदार अपना खेती बाड़ी ना जो गुजर बसर है सही ऐसे तरीके नाल अपनी स्वाबदीद ते कर सकता है हमारे असाने अबोदार विच मेरे नाना जी का नाम मलक अकबर खान है मेरे दादाजी का नाम मलक गुलाब खान है मेरे दादाजी ने 4 बेटे है ते मेरे नाना जी ने जेह्ड़े बेटी है उन्हें ये कोशिश की है कि यार मेरी इस ग्रां विच इत्थे इन्हां नूं शादियां हो जाण ताकि इन्हां ने खानदान नाल ताल्लुक आपस कायम हो सके और इंदा इन्हां जेह्ड़े जिंदगी ने हालात ने वो बेहतर तरीके नाल गुजर सके
Okay, I apologize for that. Apparently the film stopped for a moment. Thank you, Leif, for letting me know. So the reason I picked this little clip out is I invited both of these men to just talk about whatever they wanted to talk, to introduce themselves. Malik Asif Nawaz, who just introduced himself, he chose to really embed himself within a kinship network. He chose to embed himself within a timeless kind of chain of elders to himself, and he is the chain on to the next generation. Now you could say, but he's an older guy, that's what older guys do. But I've known this man for 22 years. When I met him, he is only a little bit older than me. He's younger than Malik Avez Ali, who you'll meet in just a moment. He's older than he is now, but at the time that Malik Avez Ali was invited to do this same thing, he was about the same age, right? So Malik Asif Nawaz is firmly embedded within a world in which he is part of a chain of landlords, a chain of lineage and descent, and the kinship network is crucially important to him. So I'm going to now show the next clip, which is what I asked Malik Avez Ali. I invited him, introduce yourself, and what he wanted to do was introduce his biogas production plant. He has very innovatively and very novelly set up a biogas production. Hopefully, this time around, I'm not going to have any snafus and it will just work. Let's see.
बायोगैस के 3 प्रोसीजर्स होते हैं, ठीक है। एक इसका इनपुट होता है, एक इसका प्रोसेसिंग यूनिट है और इसका एक तीसरा आउटपुट है। सो सबसे पहले हम मैन्योर को इनपुट में डालते हैं, जिसमें पानी डाल के इसको मिक्स करके प्रोसेसिंग के लिए बेसिक यूनिट के अंदर भेज दिया जाता है। ये इसका प्रोसेसिंग यूनिट है, जिसके अंदर बैक्टीरिया अपना काम करना शुरू करता है। उसके बाद जब बैक्टीरिया गैस को बनाना शुरू करता है, तो इस पाइप के थ्रू हम किचन तक लेके जाते हैं, और जिसके अंदर किचन के अंदर 3 टाइम का हमारा खाना आराम से बन जाता है। और उसके बाद जब मैन्योर्स हल्के हो जाते हैं, वो इस आउटपुट यूनिट के अंदर आ जाते हैं, और इधर से ये आप अपनी फील्ड के अंदर डाल सकते हैं उसी टाइम। ये बायोगैस प्लांट से जो गैस आ रही है, उसको अभी मैं जलाने लगा हूँ, और ये आपके सामने है। और ये गैस आ चुकी है, जो चूल्हे पे 3 टाइम का खाना आराम से पका देती है आम सिंपल इंसान हो, दो बंदों को।
That rooster at the end, these filmmakers trapped that rooster. They grabbed his foot and they poked him with a stick to get him to do something. So they're really quite brutal, these filmmakers. They didn't hurt the animal, but I would never have done that. I would have just waited infinitely long for the rooster to do something interesting, and I would have gotten nothing. So what Malik Ali is wanting to talk about is a technological change. He's not rooting himself within an unbroken chain of elders, although the elders matter a great deal to him. They're certainly important in the village across the board, but that's not what he chose to foreground for himself. Now, where did he find out about the biogas? Where did he find out about drip feed irrigation? Where did he find out about composting? Where did he find out about the dairy production that he does? He went to YouTube. Malik Asif goes to the government, he goes to the extension workers, and he asks for the extension workers to come out and help him. He gets shown by a person. Malik Avais Ali grew up more or less on the internet. He grew up with YouTube is a little bit hit and miss in Pakistan, but if you have a VPN, you can usually get around the government censors. So he manages to use YouTube to get advice on all of these things. So both of them are trying to be better farmers. They're trying to improve their land. They're trying to improve their productivity and their income. But I think the way they see solving problems is actually somewhat different. This will really come out in the next clip. The next clip, we now have Malik Asif telling me the story of Baba Sheikh Daud, which is a shrine at the top of the mountain. There's a little mountain just near the village, and this shrine is at the top of the mountain. Baba Sheikh Daud, the story of Baba Sheikh Daud is actually the story of his sister. In sometime probably in the 19th century during Ranjit Singh's reign, possibly earlier, two marauding armies were coming to the village to take this young woman and kidnap her and force her into marriage. She didn't want to be married by either of them, so she went up to the top of this mountain. She prayed to God and she said, "Please save me." God opened up the mountain. She stepped inside and God closed the mountain behind her. And so her chadar, her shawl, is trapped in this mountain, and people still say that they can see this flapping in the wind. Now, I haven't seen it myself, but I have no reason to disbelieve them when they tell me absolutely honestly that they see this chadar flapping in the wind. So this brother of this woman is now the saint. He's long dead. He's buried at the top of this mountain, and now lots of his family members are buried at the top of the mountain. That's the origin story of this Baba Sheikh Daud. And Baba Sheikh Daud he's a Gujjar, so he's not part of that kind of more extensive international network of Sufi or Pir. He is very local. And across Pakistan, there are countless numbers of these kinds of local shrines. So Malik Asif has invested huge amounts of money in this shrine, and he will tell you a little bit about what it was like. I'll show you some photographs of what it was like when I first turned up there 20 odd years ago. It was a very different place. So let me go back here. And that is the shrine at the top of the mountain.
ये पंजाबी में इनका नाम था बाबा शेख दाऊद। हमारे जो कल्चर के इलाके के लोग हैं वो इस नाम से पहचाने जाते हैं। जिस वक्त डॉक्टर स्टीव साहब इधर तशरीफ लाए, उस वक्त मैं भी ये बताता हूँ आपको कि सिर्फ एक कब्र थी, और कब्र भी बनी हुई थी अच्छे से पत्थर की। तो इसमें कोई चार दीवारी नहीं थी, कोई उसकी देखभाल के लिए जगह नहीं थी, मतलब कब्र सिर्फ ओपन थी। तो उस कब्र पर कभी कोई लोग पैसे भी फेंकते हैं, कभी कोई लोग मन्नत के तौर पर जो गंदम के या फसल के लिहाज से दाने होते हैं वो भी लेकर आते हैं।
बाबा जी आपके लिए कैसा मदद करते हैं?
डॉक्टर साहब, हमारा अकीदा है, हमारी मोहब्बत है, हमारी उन्स है, तो इसलिए हम ये ख्वाहिश करते हैं, जो भी हमारी दिल की ख्वाहिश होती है वो आकर अल्लाह के जरिए दुआ करते हैं, अल्लाह ताला हमारी दुआ कबूल कर, हमारी ये तकलीफ दूर कर, हमारी ये हाजत कबूल कर। मिसाल आपको देता हूँ कि मेरा ये एक मसला है, कोई घरेलू मसला है, कोई ज़मीन का मसला है, कोई कोर्ट्स का मसला है, तो दिल में मन्नत मानता हूँ। कोई लोग अपनी हैसियत के मुताबिक कोई एक देग मान जाता है, यार मेरा ये मसला हल हो जाएगा तो मैं बाबा जी का आकर एक देग पकाऊंगा। कहीं ये भी होता है कि देग नहीं पका सकते, वो ये मिठाई थोड़ी सी ले आते हैं, वो दुआ करके वो मिठाई तकसीम कर देते हैं।
Okay, so there you see, I hope you can see some of the sincerity with which Malik Asif relates to Baba Sheikh Daud, that this is something that he takes very seriously. And of course now, in a time of crisis, I imagine he's spending a great deal of time talking to Babaji, asking Babaji, Baba Sheikh Daud, to help him, to appeal to God, to help the village, to help the community. Now, all of that shrine infrastructure, that building, none of that was there when I first turned up. At the time, there was a footpath. It was a kind of a rough footpath. You'd walked up the mountain. It was very pleasant. It was very nice. But now they have concrete steps all the way to the top on one side, and a road that you can drive a car up to the top on the other side. Now, this is a huge expense. They have electricity up to the mountain. They have a cable running electricity. And I was told, this they put in the 90s. I was told this was because Baba Sheikh Daud didn't like it dark. He liked the light. At night, he didn't want to go to sleep in the dark. So they talk about him as a very living character, as a very living sort of person. Now, I have tried over the years to figure out exactly how much money Malik Asif has put into this shrine. It's a lot. He's slightly evasive. You know, sometimes it's a high number, sometimes it's a low number. So I don't know exactly how much it is. And I, to be honest, don't have any legitimate need to know how much it is. But I know that it's a lot of money. I know that this is a huge investment. So while other farmers, Malik Ali, for example, Malik Aves Ali, has invested no money in Baba Sheikh Daud. He does not see Baba Sheikh Daud as a solution to the agricultural problems. He doesn't see that as an avenue towards addressing drought problems or pest problems or crop failure or, you know, the market variations. Malik Asif does. Malik Asif will turn to Baba Sheikh Daud whenever there is a crisis beyond his control. Malik Ali, where does he turn? He actually turns to YouTube. He does something that's actually very familiar to me. He goes and looks and sees, what does the science say? What do other people's experience say? So it's a different way of solving problems. Now, I've talked about the differences, and I think there are some very big differences between the way these men see the world and the way they approach problem solving within the world. But the theme of this talk is not how we are all different, but it's how, despite how different we are, we can come together and actually respect one another's differences and respect the fact that your solution may not be my solution, but actually, if you tackle it one way and I tackle it another way, maybe between us, we actually do come at a more effective solution for everyone. And I think when I want to finish up with, after you see this last little clip, is to talk exactly how Malik Asif's solution and Malik Ali's solution are complementary. Within the village, that if you only had one of these approaches, you would actually have an impoverished village. You would have an impoverished community. Having them both, having this diverse approach to problem solving, gives us a much stronger, more robust and resilient village than we would have otherwise. So, last clip.
अगर आपके दादा मलिक गुलाब खान मलिक मुजफ्फर खान जिंदा है, क्या सोचेंगे इस इलाके आपके डेवलपमेंट्स, ये फ्यूचर है, क्या सोचेंगे?
ये डॉक्टर साहब बहुत अच्छा सवाल और बड़ा मुश्किल सवाल आपने किया है, क्योंकि वो अगर जिंदा होते तो कुछ काम होता ना, वो है नहीं। अगर वो जिंदा होते तो मलिक गुलाब खान मेरे दादा थे और मलिक मुजफ्फर खान मलिक अली के दादा थे, तो वो आपस में भाई थे। जिस तरह उन्होंने अपने कम्युनिटी में उस वक्त अपने दौरे हुकूमत चलाया, अपना सिस्टम निज़ाम चलाया, तो मैं यही तो ख्वाब रखता हूँ कि अगर वो जिंदा भी होते, जिस तरह उन्होंने पहले अपना तरीकाकार सिस्टम चलाते रहे हैं, अब इसे बेहतर चला सकते। और इंशाल्लाह ताला मैं उम्मीद करता हूँ कि इंशाल्लाह ताला हमारी अंडा आने वाली जो फ्यूचर वाली जो हमारी नस्ल होगी, वो हमारा इम्पैक्ट, हमारा असर देखकर इसे भी बेहतर तरक्की करेगी।
क्या ख्याल है?
मेरे ख्याल में वो बहुत खुश होते, क्योंकि उनकी जमीन को ज्यादा अच्छा डेवलप किया गया उनके बाद, क्योंकि उनके टाइम पे पुरानी जमीनें थी, पर हमने उनमें चेंज ला के, जिस तरह मलिक साहब ने यहाँ पे बाग लगा दिया है, उनके टाइम पे ये बाग नहीं था। तो जिस तरह मैंने अपनी जमीन पे ड्रिप इरिगेशन की है, उनके दौर में नहीं थी, तो वो होते तो वाकई खुश होते, क्योंकि डेवलप हुई है जमीन। थैंक यू सर, शुक्रिया।
Okay. So that's the last of the clips. As I say, the whole thing is available on YouTube. It's still being worked on. At some point, it will be finished, but probably it'll be about the time I retire. Those 12 minutes are occupying a disproportionate amount of my life. So these two approaches to problem solving. One man who regularly goes to the shrine, not just this shrine, he goes to a number of shrines. He invests heavily. He gives very generously a lot of money to shrines. The other man, you know, he's not a stingy man by any reckoning. He's a very generous man, but he does not give his money to shrines. That's not where he would look for a solution. He goes to latest technologies. He goes to something that's much more commercially oriented and much more agribusiness oriented. So how do I think these two? You could say that if Malik Asif were to invest the way Malik Ali invested, with his experience of the land and the farming, he would have been a much more successful farmer. And indeed, there are farmers of Malik Asif's generation who are like Malik Ali. They have sunk their money into latest technologies and drip feed and this and that, and they are commercially very successful. But one of the things that you see with this village, as opposed to some other villages, is there remains quite a strong sense of community feeling, community loyalty. There's a very strong sense of communitas within this village, and part of that comes from investment in things like the local shrine. So in this area, Malik Asif said, in this area, people know the name Baba Sheikh Daud, and that's true. If you go there at any time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, you will see people there. They are hanging out, they're talking to their friends, they're praying, they're contemplating, they're meditating. It's not a place for parties, it's a place for contemplation, it's a place for meditation. People are constantly there. They talk to Baba Sheikh Daud about their problems. When I had a problem, I was advised to go ask Baba Sheikh Daud for advice and to tell him my problem, and he would solve it. And believe it or not, the problem got solved. So, I have empirical proof that this works. It's not scientific, right? It's empirical. I did something, and there was an after effect that was positive. It's what I wanted. But that is very important for the community. Now, it's not an accident that Baba Sheikh Daud is actually an ancestor of Malik Asif and Malik Ali. Those two are very close cousins. This is somebody who's in their family lineage. So by building up Baba Sheikh Daud, he is building up his family's position within the area. This is not just a coincidental, let me give money to some shrine and hope that there's some divine compensation. No, this is also a very powerful symbolic statement that my family has owned and run this place for as long as anyone knows. Malik Ali, on the other hand, is constantly experimenting with farming technology. He is constantly experimenting with new techniques, drip feed irrigation, composting, biogas. He's had dairy cow production. He's gone organic. So he is one of the very few organic farmers who is catering to the organic market in Islamabad and Rawalpindi. So between the two of them, I think they actually form a very powerful team that provides that communitas for the village, but also the economic innovation and resilience to cope with changing landscapes, changing markets, changing forces around them, changing political and economic forces. So that's really the big point of the film, is that these two men, you saw at the end, Malik Ali compliments Malik Asif for his orchard. He doesn't say, this foolish old man who invests in shrines. He doesn't bother to say that. Malik Asif doesn't say, this foolish young man who never goes to the shrine and just sinks his money into drip feed irrigation that gets stolen every 3 weeks. And that is indeed what happens. Unless you leave somebody watching your drip feed irrigation 24 hours a day, it gets stolen. And Malik Ali continues to do these kinds of things, which are hugely costly, and they're a high-risk strategy. So between the two of them, they actually have enormous respect for one another. When one of them has a problem, they turn to the other. So they work together cooperatively, even though I genuinely think that they see the way the world operates in subtly yet profoundly different ways. And with that, I'm going to stop, and I welcome questions. I think we have both the questions and the chat. If you can write the questions in the question box, that's the one that I'll be checking. But Leif, I will hand over to you, please. I think you're muted, Leif.
Am I no? No, I'm not muted now.
Now I can hear you. Yes.
So, thank you, Steve. Thank you. As you said, we'll move on to the next part of the talk, and that is, of course, the question-answer session. I cannot see any questions, so I'm sure if you see them, you may repeat them as well. But maybe I can start and give people a chance to write a question or two. So you gave us an example from Latin America or Nicaragua, and it was in the framework of a study of anthropology. And I think you pointed out that the use of influence or the influence of English influenced the younger generation. And in the other example, the Pakistani one, the younger person, Malik Ali, he is looking at YouTube for new technical solutions. And perhaps one can discuss if that's also a kind of a legitimacy issue, that if I'm young and new, and I am the new generation, I need to legitimate what I do. So maybe I find keys to do that within my generation. But my question is more like, when I see this and compare with my own experiences from religious study, philoreligious studies, we are thinking more and more that the younger generation is not necessarily the one who are driving change. But in your examples, it was the young, both in Nicaragua and in Pakistan. Would you say that this is a general idea, or how do you think about who is driving change? Can it also be from the older generation? That necessarily have to be the young?
Oh, I think it's a good question. Absolutely. I wouldn't want to predetermine where the drivers of change are in any given society or in any given context. So in this case, Malik Ali is the driver of certain technological changes, but actually Malik Asif, one of the things he pays a lot of attention to is his dreams. So he had a dream years ago. He had a dream where God came to him and told him to do something, and it was actually very innovative, right? It was quite a change. So he did this as a result of the dream. He didn't get it from YouTube, but he got it from a dream of God. And at that point, he was the innovator. So when he was a younger man, he was actually quite an innovative farmer. He's less of an innovative farmer now. He's a more conservative farmer now, because in fact, farming is a very risky business. You can lose a lot. So when you're young and you don't have children, then, to lose half of a crop, well, it's going to be a hard year, but you get by. But Malik Asif has 2 children. They both went to private schools. His son has now got a master's degree in engineering. His daughter is almost certainly going to go on to university. These are expensive things. He can't afford to be particularly risky. He can't afford to be a high risk taker. Also, both of them are the kind of inheritors of this legacy system, which we call State or judgement system, where the landless peasant farmers rely on the landowners to provide them food and support in hard years. Now that system is pretty much gone. I think there's no real system of it left, but the expectation that the rich landlords will continue to be generous and take care of the poor people remains. That happens to Malik Ali and it happens to Malik Asif. So when one of their sharecropper farmers comes along and their daughter's getting married, they have to spend a lot of money on it. They have to give a lot of money. So Malik Asif, the expectations on him, because he's older, because he's a bigger landlord, the expectation is he will be more generous, which again means it's much harder for him to invest in something that doesn't have a very high probability of yielding a commercial result, a profit. Whereas Malik Ali, he can take more risks because he's younger, he doesn't have children, and he's less called upon. He also has an older brother. The older brother is the one who is called upon to make all the donations, and Malik Ali is in some ways more released from it. But I think you're right in many respects, and I don't know in religious studies, but I could imagine contexts where it would be the older people who would be pushing for the change, and the younger people might be actually quite conservative in their approach.
Sure. Well, I'm not sure if you see any questions, but I don't, so I'll continue. you have given us, I mean, you're an anthropologist who have given us a detailed example of two persons and their village context. So what would you say, are they representative? I mean, you are presenting them as if they are getting along quite nicely, but I can easily understand if this would also lead to a lot of conflicts. That and you talked about the foundation for pluralism being also that they accept each other. But I can also, there must be places where they are not working together in this type of relationship. So how representative are these two persons, and are they also represented in their categories? The landlord category.
Yeah. Indeed, that is, if you look at the rest of my work, most of it is about the conflict between landlords. Now, as it happens, these two don't conflict. These two don't have land disputes directly. They are not such close cousins. They are very, very close cousins. Their mothers are sisters, for example. So in that sense, they are remarkably close cousins. But on the patrilateral side, they're slightly more distant. So the land allocation isn't quite so murky between these two. That's typically where you get the points of conflict. And in this village, there are about 6 households that own the vast majority of the land in the area. At least it used to be. Now with the high price of land and the expansion of the housing colonies outside of Islamabad, Rawalpindi, Taxila, and so on, they've started to sell off large chunks of their land to these housing colonies. So they have less land than they did, but the land they've sold off typically is land they weren't cultivating because they couldn't get water there. So these two don't have a history of conflicting, but of course they do have a history of conflict with others. Malik Asif, one of the reasons that I was so pleased to work with Malik Asif, he was the one that I met 22 years ago when I was looking for a village to do some field work. And in the first week that I met him, I discovered that he was engaged in a land conflict with his cousins that was effectively a land conflict that had been going on for about 100 years. That his grandparents had had a conflict over this land, his parents had had a conflict over this land, and now he was having a conflict over this land. So I latched onto him and discovered here's a man who understands conflict. He knows how to argue, he knows how to fight. And some of the cousins, if we were to do a different film with one of his other cousins, there would be no toleration, there would be no cooperation. They're not great friends at all. Although I have to say relations are much better than they were when this film was made. So 2010 to 2014 was a particularly low point for village conflicts, or a particularly high point for village conflicts. 2014, they had a very, very big mediation council at Jirga that resolved most of it. And so now it is a relatively peaceful village again. And that flares up. It seems to be every generation or so, there's about a 3 to 5 year period where there's intense conflict that's actually quite frightening. And then it gets resolved, but it doesn't get resolved. It just gets deferred till the next generation. So when Malik Asif, which I hope is a very long time, when Malik Asif passes away, I have no doubt that his son will get pulled into some very vicious conflicts, just as he got pulled into conflicts that his father had dealt with and his grandfather had dealt with. So yeah, are they representative? In some ways, I think they're representative. I think Malik Asif probably is, it's easier to find landlords like Malik Asif, although he is a unique, special character all in his own right. But there are more landlords probably who would go to the shrines, who would see that when times are hard, the solution is to be more devout, to be a better Muslim, to go to the shrines and to appeal to the Sufis, to appeal to the peers. Malik Ali he's typical probably of a younger generation that's more urban. Rural areas, you're starting to see more people like him, but it's very common in urban areas to have fairly cosmopolitan kind of global approaches to problem solving. I don't think that's at all unusual in Pakistan today. Young people are certainly not all turning to a devout solution to their problems. Although you mentioned the talk we had with Habib last night, Sahibzada Habibur Rahman, the head of a Sufi order in Haripur, not very far from, about maybe 40, 50 kilometers from the village that this was filmed in. And he said that there is a return to religion, that people are flocking to the shrine because now they're scared. Now they're seeing an end of days scenario, and in an end of days scenario or end of time scenario, then you definitely fall back on those things that you were taught as a younger person. Now, Malik Ali, I don't know if he's now turning to the shrines. I need to talk to him about it, but you know, we're Facebook friends, and I have yet to see a picture of him at any shrines. And I see pictures of Malik Asif at the shrines at least every week. He's at a different shrine. So I think they're not atypical, but it would be unfair to try and generalize to all Punjabi farmers based on these two.
I still don't see any other person asking a question, so I'll go on, and you stop me when you think we should finish, or someone else is actually asking a question.
Well, I think we're aiming for about an hour, right? So
okay, that's fine. But then I have another one for you. And you mentioned in your the last answer things that I think were very interesting from kind of scientific academic perspective, and that was that you said you were looking for a village, and you were also lucky. You said that you met Malik Asif, and when we saw the film, we saw you adopting in the dress, the local dress, and I presume that the chatting you did was in the Punjabi dialect of Urdu. So you were melting in. But how did you think first when you came there in terms of method, and how did it then end up in this? Because this is a project that is more or less been a lifelong project for you. So how do you think about the methodological aspects of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something that I spend some time talking about with students, how we fall into things. I was actually going to do a PhD in Ghana in West Africa because my high school coach, who was hugely inspirational to me, he'd been in the Peace Corps in Ghana. And so when I was 16, he told me, go to Ghana. So I was going to go to Ghana. I went to Pakistan to help a friend set up an NGO, organize an NGO, because I had some friends and I had a little bit of experience with the country. So we went there and we started wandering around villages. And this is a village where I came to do something on farming. My intent was to study indigenous farming practices. Malik Asif grabbed me. I told him I was going to go to Ghana to do my PhD, and he grabbed my hand, he grabbed my wrist, and he dragged me around his village. He said, no, you're not going to Africa. You're staying here, and over there I'll build you a house, and that man there, he'll be your washerman, and that man there will be your guard. That man there, his wife cooks really well. She'll cook all your food for you. And he didn't do any of those things for me. He put me in a room in his house, which was just off the garage. So, you know, every time the cars would come in, my room would fill with carbon monoxide, and I nearly died multiple times. But he did take very good care of me. And his wife was the one who provided all my food. She cooked for me, and she is a fantastic cook. And then I discovered that although he is a very good farmer, farming was not the preoccupation for him. The preoccupation for him was these land conflicts. So within probably 6 weeks, I had shifted my research from indigenous farming practices to understanding land conflict. Land conflict is not something that you just kind of get by looking at it or by reading at it. You have to see a number of them over the years. And I've watched these land conflicts very closely because Malik Asif, like all Punjabi landlords, as far as I can tell, is continuously involved in a land conflict. It's never ending. Every single Punjabi farmer I know has some kind of land dispute with one of their cousins, typically their cousins, sometimes not their cousins, sometimes their neighbors. So the methodological issue here is actually, I fell into this, and I recently have been reevaluating all of this and thinking, did I fall into it, or is it that I'm fascinated by conflict, so I gravitated towards someone who I saw was enmeshed in a bunch of land conflict? Because there are plenty of people there who do indigenous farming, and I could have hung out with them. I hung out with this guy. He and I became mates because he shouts a lot and he waves his guns around and he threatens people. And I kind of found that, you know, inspiring and exciting and frightening at the same time. But I wanted to understand this man better. And I should say, he actually doesn't use violence. He's not a violent man at all. He used threats of violence, but I've never seen him be violent, unlike some other landlords who don't threaten very much, but they're much more violent than he is. So he is someone who manages his land conflicts without violence, but with that threat of violence always there. And I've seen him now for 22 years never be violent, but always have the menace. So people always, they're not quite sure, and I've never seen it yet happen. I shouldn't say that in public. It might undermine his next land dispute. But I think the methodological questions there for anthropology, it's an endless ball of string. And I see here that there are some questions in the chat. Oh my goodness. So let me, just with a wondering few minutes, there's a very good couple of questions here.
Okay, I see them.
So,
I can read them to you if you like.
Okay, sure.
I'll take them from the beginning, or the first one. I wonder if it's a simple. It is as simple as young slash YouTube and internet, an older person slash shrine and ancestry. Are there other things? And I'm thinking especially of gender that drive decision making and investment decision making.
Well, I think this is absolutely right. So when I was talking about Malik Ali being unmarried, having no children, being a younger son, he has more room to take some risks, more room to go to European farmers, North American farmers, and try what they do. Malik Asif is a head of household. He's the eldest brother. He's the eldest son. He has 2 children. He has a lot of people who depend on him. He has never, since he was 22 when his father died, he has never had the luxury of being able to take risks the way Malik Ali has. So I think that's right. It's not, I'm not going to give all the credit to YouTube. YouTube is just a sort of a symptom that helps me diagnose a different approach to solving problems, but it's not the cause of why those problems are solved differently.
I think that was the question that I've seen in the chat. I can't see any other. If you can see any other question, please, then you have to read it. I can't do it.
I see one question here, and I think probably this will be the last question we can wrap up because it's a long time to be staring at a screen. It says, if the person says, if I'm not wrong, this is a rain-fed area, which is true. So how do both Malik Asif and Malik Ali deal with dry periods? Malik Asif would prefer turning to the shrine. How would Malik Ali go about the situation? Also, what's the belief response in the difference of productivity of both landlords? Is Malik Asif satisfied with perhaps a lesser yield without technology? The first question, that is one of the things that first alerted me that these men responded differently to drought. I asked, there have been sustained periods of drought over the last 22 years. This is an ongoing problem. It's rain-fed. There's no reliable surface water year-round in the area at all. The water comes from the rain, or they have to dig the tube wells. They have both dug their tube wells. Malik Asif has dug his tube well. He has a great big reservoir, and then he has these little mini canals that irrigate the fields. And he goes, when there's a drought, he goes up to the shrine, he holds a dake, he has these big rice-giving ceremonies, and he gives out a lot of food. And that is what he does to try and change the weather patterns. Malik Ali has invested in drip feed irrigation and rain guns. So you saw in the video 2 of his 3 rain guns. He's invested quite heavily in trying to maximize the use of the water that he has from the ground well, from the tube well. And that is, I mean, they both would say they rely on technology. They both have electrified their tube wells. They both are trying to maximize that groundwater. But Malik Ali is trying to be more innovative in the technologies. And Malik Asif continues to go to the shrine. Is Malik Asif satisfied with perhaps a lesser yield without technology? He's not satisfied at all. No, he's very disappointed and very upset. And I think if I could answer this question in a slightly different way, I'd known Malik Asif about 6 months or 8 months, and we were walking down the road. We were taking our after dinner evening meal, evening stroll around the village, and he was holding my hand, as he always did, because when we were in public, he liked to hold my hand to show everybody I'm his. I belong to him. I'm his thing. And we were walking along, and he said, "Steve Saab, I have a really serious question for you. You Europeans, you're not good Christians. You're not good with God. So how come you're so rich? It doesn't make sense. I'm good with God, and I'm not rich. How come? Why? This doesn't make sense to me." And I think this is a question he's puzzling with his entire life. How come someone like me sits around, drinks tea, eats samosa, does like nothing, and he obviously can see that I don't pray very much. I'm not a good Christian. I don't obey all the rules, and he obeys all the rules. He's a very good Muslim. So how come my life is one that's leisurely and abundant, and his life is one of hard work and repeated problems with crops and pests and irrigation and conflict and all of that. And this is something that I think he still wrestles with. What is it that he's not doing right? What is it? How come I'm getting rewarded and Europeans get rewarded for not being very good with God, and he doesn't in the same way? I tried to give him the story of Job, but my Urdu simply isn't good enough to give Bible lessons to anyone. So I don't know the answer to this, except that no, he is not satisfied with a lesser yield based on the poor technology. And I think perhaps, Leif, shall we wrap it up there?
I think we should, but I think I would like to end by thanking you and also saying that the last question or the last answer you gave reminds me of a lot of ethnographic work in the field of religion as well, where you actually do field work among religious people who are sometimes, bringing this discussion up. So I've recognized myself very well in that one. The other thing I would like to say again is, of course, that we should advertise the YouTube channel. There will be more from the lecture series. You are also with responses and the crisis in Pakistan, especially COVID-19, and also again advertise the Facebook page of AKU-ISMC, where they have a paper on the COVID-19 responses in Iran, Pakistan, and Syria. And once again, I think we actually should end, Steve, not only by thanking you, but also giving you the opportunity to mention the title of your book, the last one, because that brings up a lot of what you are mentioning right now. So thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much. The title of my book is Political Kinship in Pakistan, Dissent and Marriage and Government Stability, I think it's called. It's by Lexington Press, came out in 2019. And if there is a 30% discount code that I'm happy to share with anyone. I'll put it up on Facebook. We can, there it is, Political Kinship in Pakistan, Dissent, Marriage and Government Stability. Yes, and Malik Asif, although he's not named in the book, he does crop up in the book, as does Malik Ali. Although Malik Ali is not married, so less relative, and he doesn't do conflict, so he's a minor player in that book. Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who was listening as well. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.